Thanks everybody for joining us today on our webinar. As always, please keep your lines muted. We are recording. You can put your questions into the chat, and at the end, we'll open up the lines for you to ask some questions to Dan. With that, I will turn this over to John for introductions.
Thanks very much, Hope. Before I introduce Dan, we also have our state board chairman, Tom Neely, with us. Tom, do you want to give a quick hello?
Sure. Thank you, John. Welcome everybody to this great session. I think our partnerships with our allied members is really strong, and we really appreciate Dan's time this morning to help us walk through the importance of entertainment licensing. Too many times our industry gets caught with our pants down when we're unaware, and this is a great safety mechanism to make sure that doesn't happen. So I'll turn it back over. Thanks much.
Thank you very much, Tom. Most of you are aware that I spent my entire career either running hotels or restaurants. And decades ago, I was close enough to the operations that I understood music licensing, but I really didn't. These were organizations. BMI was one that I knew of, and the other one was ASCAP, who sent me bills. And in some cases back then, and BMI certainly might not fall into this, used some what I would have called heavy-handed tactics to get me to pay their bills. And I never understood why, what they were for. And yet, since joining PRLA 8 years ago, I now fully understand why they're there. I've gotten to know Dan Spears, who's the Vice President of Engagement for BMI. And Dan has done wonders to help people understand the importance of BMI. I was a bit embarrassed because I'm a music lover. There's never a moment in my home that music isn't on. And to understand that this is so important to support the people that write the songs that I listen to every day. If I were still in the business, I would gladly write the checks to make sure that the artists were taken care of. So Dan's going to talk a bit about that today. And also, by being a member of PRLA, BMI also offers a discount to pay those fees. I hate to call them fees because they're money that goes directly to the artist to thank them for the great work they've done writing songs for us, which they would not get remunerated for were it not for BMI and organizations like that. Dan's a terrific guy, has become a close friend and a great representative for BMI as a music licensing service. So with that, I'm happy to introduce Dan Spears. Thanks again, Dan, for taking the time.
John, thank you. And thanks, Tom and Hope and Eric and everyone on the PRLA team. John, you're right. It's been a great partnership, and our friendship is something that I've cherished over the years. And anytime I have an opportunity in public to say thank you for that friendship and partnership, I'm going to, since I know we're getting down to the final days of your tenure as the CEO. And I've just watched with great admiration as you've led that association and seen what you've done with arguably one of the most respected restaurant associations, hospitality associations in the country. So John, again, thanks for all that you do, and thank you for being a great supporter of BMI and for me personally. Today, we're going to just take a few minutes to kind of hopefully bring you knowledge and power in understanding this very confusing industry. There's nothing worse than starting a live music program at your restaurant or hotel, thinking that this is going to be a wonderful experience for not only your staff, but your customers, of course. And then you start getting peppered with phone calls from these acronyms that you've never heard of, and you didn't realize the steps you needed to take from a licensing perspective to be, quote, copyright compliant. So, we're going to spend some time taking you through, hopefully in a very layman's term fashion, all the steps you need to take to make sure that your venue is legal and able to play live music. And I'll give you a little bit of understanding of the players in the space, and so that when you do talk to these other acronyms, you'll feel like you're speaking from a position of knowledge, which, as we know, can be extraordinarily helpful rather than being just almost victimized in some cases because you don't understand the company that's calling you and you're concerned about doing the right thing. No BMI representative would be worth their salt without beginning a presentation, with, hold on a second, for some reason, I'm not advancing. I'm frozen. Okay, here we go. No BMI rep would be worth their salt without starting a presentation with a little bit of music. So you'll know in just a minute the point of doing this.
Well, shake it up, baby, now. Shake it up, baby. Twist and shout. Twist and shout. Come on, come on, come on, come on, baby, now. Come on and work it on now. Work it on up. You know you look so good. You look so good. You really got that jumping. Yeah, you got me jumping. I knew you would. Well, shake it up, girl. Oh, shake it so fine, baby. Move a little closer. Now show the world that you're mine.
So other than wanting to start this presentation on a high note, there was a reason behind this. And that is just to show that a lot of the great music that you hear in your restaurant, bar, hotel, radio station, what have you, was not written by the artists themselves. We often think, oh, that song was written by, you know, that particular band or artist, but in many cases, it's written by an anonymous songwriter. In this case, songwriters. Twist and Shout was written by Phil Medley and Burt Russell. Yet, look at all those amazing bands that covered it. And so this is really why BMI exists and why these other organizations exist, is to make sure those anonymous folks behind the scenes are fairly compensated. This is how they make a living, through the music rights contained within the copyright law. So today we're going to really touch on about 5 things. One is kind of demystify the music copyrights. What exactly are they? What's licensable in your restaurant or hotel or bar? Who are the performing rights organizations? These are the companies that represent these rights, this public performance right on behalf of songwriters. We're going to delve into who they are so you can have a greater understanding of their organization, their catalog, so that when you speak to them, you can have more knowledge of where they're coming from. Then we're going to talk a little bit about, towards the end, a way that you can simplify your live music booking process, a partnership that we have forged with an online booking company that I think perhaps could benefit some of you all that may be restarting your live music program or perhaps doing it for the first time. John touched on the discounts. We'll talk about the discounts that you get by being a member of the PRLA, and we'll also talk about a discount program that we have with Gigmore that will give you a chance to perhaps try their service. But first, we're going to delve into the legal aspects of all of this, because the foundation for, of course, music rights and all that we do is the copyright law. And there really are 3 kind of important rights within the copyright law that I always like to talk about, because they're the music, the bundle of music rights. There's really only one here that is going to affect your day-to-day operation, but I like to talk about all 3 just so you get a greater understanding of this revenue stream that comes to songwriters and publishers. So I'm actually going to start at the bottom and work my way up. The synchronization license is a license and a right that pertains to songwriters and publishers when music is played in a television show, a movie, or a commercial. So, for example, if you're doing a commercial for your restaurant and you want Fun, Fun, Fun by the Beach Boys to be in that commercial, you actually need to get permission from the publisher of that song. You need to go to, and I can't off the top of my head remember who the Beach Boys publisher is for their music, but you have to go to them and get permission for the rights to have that song in your commercial. That'd be the same for a music supervisor for a movie or a television show. And that revenue stream goes to the publisher and the songwriter. They split that income 50-50. A publisher plays kind of the role almost of an agent in the life of a song. A publisher is the organization that actually owns the copyright to a song, And they're the ones that are trying to get that music in a commercial, in a television show, cut by an artist, so that song has a revenue stream attached to it. So that's why when royalties are paid, 50% is going to the songwriter and 50% is going to the publisher who own the copyright. A songwriter gives that copyright to the publisher in exchange for the work the publisher does to try and bring life to the song. The right of reproduction or mechanical royalties, that's when a song is downloaded, or if we're still buying vinyl, there might be some folks on this call that still buy vinyl or consumed a lot of CDs over the years. 9.1 cents per song sold or downloaded goes to the songwriter and the publisher. That used to be a very big revenue stream for the songwriter back when people bought albums, multi-platinum selling albums. That was a big deal. If I wrote a song that was on a Garth Brooks album years ago, that would get me a lot of money because people bought the album in its entirety. Now people are just buying singles, so you need to get a radio single actually coming out of that album for you to really generate much in the way of income. And that income from that radio single would come through the public performance rights. And that's when a song is played on a radio station, in a bar, a restaurant, a hotel, your favorite fitness class, streamed on Spotify, played in a concert. So if you're a songwriter and your song is released to radio as a single, that's going to guarantee that you're going to get some income off of that. So let's talk more about the performance royalties, because that's really what BMI does, and that's really the only right that impacts your operation on a daily basis. As I indicated before, as a songwriter, you're entitled to royalties whenever your music is played publicly, and that fits into a lot of different areas, as you see. What's licensable from your perspective? If you have a commercial radio station airing in your business and you've got 6 or 7 speakers up, that's licensable. There is an exemption, however, if you have square footage, I believe it's somewhere in the vicinity of less than 3,000 square feet, you have a commercial radio station playing, you don't have to pay licensing fees. That was because of the Fairness in Music Licensing Act that was passed a number of years ago. Television sets, if you're a sports bar, you've got the audio turned on your TVs, believe it or not, that's licensable. You'd think that the cable companies or DirecTV would pay for that, but the copyright law has decided, or Congress really decided within that copyright law years ago, that no, that audio coming out of the television set that contains music from a halftime show or episodic music from a television show or a movie is the responsibility of that business that has that audio on with the television. So if you don't want to pay licensing fees, you turn the audio off. Live music, of course, that's a big performance rights trigger. DJs, if you have a DJ coming in at night, after 10 o'clock playing music, that's a public performance. Karaoke is considered a public performance of music. And I talked about the TVs. Now, the commercial music services, the good news is if you're a restaurant and that's all you have for music, you don't have any live music, no karaoke, no DJs, you just have a commercial music service, and these are some examples. They pay those licensing fees on your behalf. So you do not have to deal with any performing rights organizations. So if you get a phone call from some of these folks I'm about ready to talk about, you tell them, hey, I've got a commercial music service agreement with Mood Media or Pandora for Business, and that's all I do, then you're good to go. The only way you might need to obtain an additional license would be if you're using these commercial music services in an interactive way. If for whatever reason on Saturday nights, you turned on a Pandora channel that was dance music and people were dancing, Pandora's license with BMI, for example, has a very narrow scope. It's only for ambient and background music. And these are all the digital music providers, of course, that exist. If you don't have a business license with them, Spotify for Business, Pandora for Business, and you're just streaming your own personal account, then you do need to obtain your own licenses with the respective performing rights organizations. So before we get to a discussion of who those performing rights organizations are, because I think that's probably going to be the most valuable aspect of this presentation, let's just talk about how the process works, kind of the music ecosystem or circle of life, as we call it at BMI. Songwriter writes a song. They choose to affiliate. In this case, we'll use BMI as the example. BMI, as I mentioned, also represents publishers who own the right. So BMI works for both the songwriter and the publisher. As a songwriter, you make that conscious decision early in your career. These are very popular names just because high profile names, rather than put most of the anonymous songwriters we represent on here, we chose names that you heard of. These are artists who write songs themselves. They affiliate with BMI. Sometimes it's just relationship driven. They know somebody who was a member of BMI. It could be that, you know, growing up, they saw BMI on an Elvis record and said, oh, I want to be BMI because Elvis was. Then we go out and we track the performances of this music, which is a big part of what we do. Radio airplay, television cue sheets. And then we, of course, go to you all, to bars and restaurants, and we license that catalog of music on behalf of the songwriters and publishers. And there's so many different ways or venues and events that public performance rights kick in, as I've discussed. And then, of course, we pay royalty payments out to our songwriters and publishers on a quarterly basis. So here are the performing rights organizations. I'm going to start with ASCAP because they're the oldest. They were founded in 1914. They're a not-for-profit membership-based society. They represent, depending upon who you ask, but I would say between 45 and 50% of the music that's out there in the marketplace. When they started, of course, most of the music they represented was sort of the Gershwin, Stephen Foster stuff. ASCAP always, from the very beginning, had a very strict policy about who could join their organization. You had to have at least 2 established hits on the radio. And in the late 30s, when a lot of the new music came on the scene, Appalachian music, hillbilly music, race music, which we now know as R&B, a lot of radio stations couldn't play that music because of that strict requirement that ASCAP had, that you had to have at least 2 established hits on the radio. Well, radio wouldn't play it because there was no copyright compliance mechanism. ASCAP wouldn't let them be members because their music wasn't on the radio. So it was a catch-22 for these new forms of music. So that's how BMI was created. The broadcasters got together, in this case, primarily the radio industry. TV had not come on the scene yet. And they sold shares of stock as seed money to create this company to allow these new forms of music to come to radio. They also did it to try and create a competitive music source because ASCAP was a monopoly, and each year they were increasing their fees by over 100%. So BMI was founded in 1939 by a bunch of radio stations. And to this day, our board of directors is made up of radio executives. And BMI is often credited with helping bring about the explosion of music on the American scene way back in the late 30s because of this open door policy where BMI said, any form of music is welcome here. You don't have to have any hits on the radio. Come on in. So the Muddy Waters, the Chuck Berrys, the Little Richards are all BMI songwriters. And so we have a very deep catalog in the area of R&B and rock. BMI also operates under a not-for-profit model. And so you can be assured that when you pay licensing fees to BMI, 90 cents of every dollar you pay goes to BMI. We represent, BMI songwriters. We represent about 50% plus of the music that's out there. And here's where it gets a little legal, but I'm going to try and make it as easy to understand as possible. ASCAP and BMI, they both operate under Justice Department consent decrees that were written back in the 1960s for antitrust purposes because there's only a few players in this space, and they were concerned about monopolistic behavior. So these consent decrees were created. And there's a lot of stuff in the consent decree that doesn't have any impact on your business. But there's one aspect in that consent decree that's very important for you to know, and that is we are required, ASCAP as well, to treat similarly situated businesses in a similar fashion. And what that means is that BMI cannot offer a license agreement that's any different, rates that are any different from one restaurant versus another. So you can be assured that when you do a license agreement and sign an agreement with ASCAP and BMI, what you're getting is exactly the same agreement with exactly the same terms, exactly the same fee schedule and formula as your competitor across the street. And because of that, we cannot negotiate. We are prohibited by law. So these are industry contracts that are set in stone. Now, these two organizations I'm about ready to speak about, CSAC, first of all, does not operate under Justice Department consent decree. They are a much smaller organization. They are for-profit, owned by a venture capital company. They probably have 5% of the music that's out there, but they've got some high-profile songwriters and artists. They've got Green Day and a bunch of others, so that you have to do business with them. It's very difficult to avoid not playing their music, but you can negotiate with them. And I encourage you to do so, because they can be very aggressive out of the box, and they can quote rates that are very similar to BMI and ASCAP's rates, yet their catalog is much, much smaller. So be prepared to push back if necessary. Don't accept what they come after you with initially. You must engage with them. You have to do business with them, because they do have a catalog of music that you could potentially be playing. And then the fourth organization, much like CSAC, for-profit, started by Irving Azoff, former Eagles manager, very successful music executive. He has a catalog of music that's about 5%, something like that, but very high-profile songwriters: Bruce Springsteen, Bruno Mars, Pharrell Williams, and they're very aggressive right now. They're going to come after you in a very aggressive fashion. They haven't, at this point, put on a full court press on the restaurant industry, but they're starting. They went for the low-hanging fruit first. They negotiated deals with the radio industry. They've gone after TV. But again, if they come back to you with a very aggressive fee, don't hesitate to push back. Their catalog is only about 10% of BMI. So if you're paying BMI $300 a year and they come to you with a quote of $250, there's an issue there. Now, understand, all these organizations exist for one reason, and that's to represent the public performance right on behalf of songwriters and publishers. If they didn't exist, you would still be responsible as a business for complying with the copyright law. So although you may not feel like it, they were created to make your life easier. You'd have to go license each individual song with each individual publisher and songwriter if these performing rights organizations weren't out there doing it on behalf of their songwriters. So they may seem to sometimes be a pain in your butt, and they may at times not provide, and I hope it's not BMI, but sometimes you're going to feel that their behavior is a little too overly, I keep using the word aggressive because a couple of them are. In the end, they are intended to try and create blanket license agreements that make your life easier. We have relationships with international societies that represent our music overseas, much the way we represent their music here. So if it's a British songwriter, we're representing the rights here for them, and vice versa. So when you sign a BMI license, you're also gaining access to music written by songwriters affiliated with performing rights organizations overseas. As I alluded to earlier, BMI is not in the business of making any profit from licensing you as a business. We're only there for one reason, and that's to make sure that songwriters and composers and music publishers are fairly compensated for their works. So our overhead rate's about 10%, a little less right now, and 90 cents of every licensing dollar you pay goes to the songwriter. So if you come away with anything from this presentation, I hope that it's, yes, I understood about the copyright law and the compliance that's necessary, but I hope you also understand how much we appreciate what you do to support songwriters in the creative process. Because when you pay that money to BMI, you're allowing a songwriter to continue to write music and put food in their table for their family. And if you can look at it from a human standpoint, I think perhaps it will resonate more with you, rather than, oh yeah, my lawyer said if I don't sign a license for you guys, I'll be sued for copyright infringement. Yeah, there is a copyright law that's the underlying foundation for this, but it's also an important part of the way that songwriters make a living. So you're a big part of that ecosystem I referred to before. For those that have not used live music before, or have never entered into agreements with BMI or ASCAP or the other organizations, our agreements, I think ASCAP's are similar, are based upon occupancy at restaurants, fire code numbers. It's very straightforward. There's an a la carte menu where you choose what music use you have. If you've got live music, karaoke, recorded music, but it all ties into what your occupancy number is. Hotels, those fees are determined a little bit differently. Has to do with your entertainment costs, how much you pay those artists, songwriters to perform. And then also if you've got live, not live, but recorded music that's not a commercial music service, but your own recorded music, then it's based upon how many rooms you have. I mention this every time because this is a way that you can actually help us. If you're paying licensing fees to BMI and you have local singer-songwriters performing at your establishment, and they're playing originals, not just covers, and they're affiliated with BMI or even the other PROs because they've got similar programs, make sure that they join, in BMI's case, BMI Live. Because what happens is that most of the music that you're playing in your restaurants and bars, a lot of it is cover stuff. And those songwriters are being compensated through the radio airplay survey information that we gather. But what's being lost in the shuffle there is the local singer-songwriter from Harrisburg that is playing their own original songs in that Harrisburg restaurant. And the only way they get compensated for those original songs is if they upload that set list every night to BMI so we know what was played. And it benefits you as a restaurant owner or hotelier or bar owner to encourage them to do that, because then you know those fees you're paying to BMI are going to exactly who should receive them. And if you're about supporting local singer-songwriters, which many of you are, this ensures that they're getting the money they deserve. Finally, I want to talk about something that we're pretty excited about, that we created this partnership in the midst of the pandemic to try and help bars and restaurants rebuild the live music programs in the midst of a pandemic and post-pandemic. We felt that, you know, many of you might lose your entertainment booker, and you're pressed for time, and obviously staffing issues are a huge challenge for you right now. And so you're thinking about live music and I don't have the time or the resources to start it. And I don't even know where to go to book the local artists. We partnered with an online booking company called Gigmore, and they're like Facebook, or actually more appropriately, they're like Match.com, really, for music venues and artists. And you sign up, and as a venue, you can plug in, oh, gee, next Wednesday night, I want an R&B artist to perform at my restaurant. And it'll show you all the R&B artists that are in the York, Harrisburg area, whatever market you happen to be in. And we started this program, this partnership. I think they're a really good organization, Gigmore. I think it's a very simple process, but we want you to try it. We want you to sample it. So we've created a discount program for our association members to try this out. So for your first booking, you can get a $200 off coupon for that first one. So you might be booking a singer-songwriter in Harrisburg for $400 with the BMI discount. That's $200 off. So we invested some money into this to try and make this an easy process for you, but we also want to do kind of a beta test to see if it works. And so that's what the $200 discount is for, and we hope that you'll take advantage of it. We also have the association discount program that your fearless leader, John, referred to. You can save up to 20% on your BMI licensing fees by virtue of your membership with the PRLA. This is only for restaurants. It's 5% for being a member, 5% for paying online, and 10% for paying upfront in advance. And you know, we love our partnership. As I've mentioned several times, we've done a number of songwriter events at your conferences and meetings as a way to kind of give back to you all and to make what we do more tangible. So it's a good time for questions. If anybody, by the way, wants information on getting that $200 off their first booking with Gigmore online, here's my email address. Send me an email. I'll send you the instructions on getting that $200 off The only thing I ask in exchange for is you get back to me and tell me about the process. Kind of give me a quote. Hey, this was easy, this wasn't easy, because we're still kind of in the early stages of our relationship with Gigmore, and we want to get feedback on it as we move forward. So now, if there's any questions, I'm ready and willing to answer them.
Dan, I haven't seen any yet, but we'll give them a minute. And while we're waiting for that, thank you so much for taking the time today. And again, thank you for your partnership, and in particular for what you do for the songwriters. Dan, as part of his relationship with two different organizations that PRLA is involved in, one is called the Council of State Restaurant Associations, which is all of my other 51 state restaurant association counterparts, and ISHE, which is the International Society of Hotel Associations, which is the hotel association version of that. And because Pennsylvania is dual, we're involved in both. Dan frequently brings a songwriter to our annual conferences who performs for us, but more importantly than that, they tell a story. And I remember the very first time I met Dan in Nashville, and he had a young lady songwriter there who number one, they performed songs that you never dreamt that somebody other than the artist you heard perform them wrote. So you get to see the people that actually wrote these famous songs. And in this case, it was a young lady who was phenomenal. Dan, I don't remember her name, but she was, after she performed, she said, I have to thank BMI, because were it not for BMI, today I would be hooking or worse. And it really brought it home that this is a very personal thing that BMI does, and that we're involved in. So when you're writing your checks to BMI, at least in my opinion, you can feel good that it's going to someone who worked really hard to earn that money. And it's not Dolly Parton, who I'm thinking of. It's the young lady who is struggling to make ends meet that counts on that quarterly check from BMI to put groceries on the table. So anyway, Dan, thanks again for all of that. There are a couple questions here now. I think you can see them, so I'll let you read them and answer them.
Yeah, so great questions, kind of touching on the same thing, and I neglected to mention it during my presentation. I'm really glad you brought it up. The question that comes to me most often is the one that's being asked by Donnie and Stephen, and that is, do I need to get a music license agreement with all four organizations, or can I get away with one or two? It's a tough question to answer, because technically, if you wanted to put somebody on your staff in charge of digging into the repertoires of BMI and ASCAP and figuring out what kind of music that you're airing or playing at your establishment, you know, which organization it's represented by, you might be able to try and do it. We have a great database that came out earlier in the year called SongView that you can access through the BMI website, bmi.com. And it's a wonderful database that tells you every single piece of music and who represents it. And it's great. However, what you find is a lot of the songs that your singer-songwriters or cover bands are playing have been co-written. There's a BMI songwriter, an ASCAP songwriter, and a CSAC songwriter. And so it's very difficult to just go with one organization, because there's this collaboration that goes on, particularly in Nashville, between songwriters from various performing rights organizations. So that's number one. So it's hard to carve out that music. And then also, listen, I mean, a lot of the music that's out there isn't necessarily represented by BMI. I mean, like, if you play any Bruce Springsteen, GMR represents Bruce Springsteen. So to get in the business of not playing certain music because it's affiliated with PROs you're not licensed through is a tough proposition. And you all are in the business of, selling food and beverage, right? I mean, not in the business of managing all of this music that's coming through your establishment. So honestly, the easiest way to do it is get licenses with all four PROs. But as I said before, if you have the time and the energy and the patience, CSAC and GMR should be negotiated with, because you shouldn't be paying as much as you're paying to BMI and ASCAP in the course of the year. So if you're a small operation, with a couple of hundred people occupancy, you're paying BMI, I don't know, $350 a year, and maybe ASCAP the same. So that's $700 between GMR and CSAC. You shouldn't be paying, more than $300 or $400. So your annual fees to all those PROs should only be about $1,000, I would think. That's just an example. It of course has to do with every business is different, but yeah, I do think that you got to talk to all four unless you're in the business of, and you're able to carve out music, which I don't think anybody is. Please speak to sometimes forgotten channel of music on hold for telephone systems. Yeah, I mean, we do license music on hold. I will tell you, if you're a business that's already licensed by BMI, you've got live music or what have you, and you have an agreement with BMI, or you're a radio station that's paying licensing fees to BMI, and you have music on hold, you're not going to find many PROs that are going to nitpick and try and get you to license that music on hold. If you've created your own music on hold system and you have no other music use in your restaurant or bar but that, and you want to do the right thing, you can get a license for that. But I found over the years that we're not very, at least BMI is not very aggressive with current BMI customers and trying to penny pinch them and get them to license that music on hold. But technically, by the letter of the law, it's supposed to be licensed. It is considered a public performance. Recently read that there are square footage and number of house speakers metrics for house background music, which music license. Yes. So that refers to Tim. If anybody has read his question, he's basically asking, is there an exemption when it comes to square footage and house speakers for getting a music license? Yes, but the exemption only relates to playing a commercial radio station. And it's in the copyright law, and I can find it and send it all to you, or it might actually be on, there's a brochure, a flyer that we send out to all the associations that on the back has an FAQ, and it might be included in that FAQ. If not, we'll find it and send it around. We'll get Hope or whoever to share it, or you can email me and I can send it to you myself. There is a exemption, as I referred to earlier. I think it's for retail, it's 2,000 and something, and I think for restaurants and bars, it's 3,000 or something, and it also lists a bunch of speakers restrictions as well. But that only applies to commercial radio stations. That wouldn't apply to live music or if you were playing your own Spotify account. But it's covered in the copyright law. There's a specific section that speaks to it, and we can get that to you. I have several establishments. Do I have to license each one? Yes, you have to license each one. If you have, we have a discount if you've got more than, I think it's 7 establishments. There is a discount involved. But yes, you license each entity separately. The copyright law recognizes that a public performance takes place at in a specific business and is considered a separate performance. So you are required to get a license for each one of those venues.
I think there was one above that question too, Dan, from Donnie.
Yeah, that was the one about, let's see.
Oh.
It sounds like radio stations pay BMI. If a radio station is paying BMI, it chooses the radio. Because, yeah, I'm sorry, I missed that, Hope. Because the copyright law recognizes that as 2 separate performances. So the radio station performance that's coming out of its speakers, out of its transmitter, I should say, is considered one performance. Then the second public performance is when it's played in your establishment. So as a result, the copyright law says that will require 2 separate licenses. The radio agreement that we have only licenses the music to the listener. It doesn't license it from that to a public space, if that makes any sense. It's considered 2 separate performances. And again, it's not, some of these things you might say, well, that doesn't sound right, or maybe that's not fair, but that's how the law reads. It's kind of like the same discussion I'll have with people when they'll say, wait a minute, if I hire a cover band on Saturday night that's a U2 tribute band, why am I responsible for licensing that music? Why is the tribute band not responsible for paying the U2 songwriters for that? It's a good question, but it's just not how the system works. It's the business that's benefiting from the music that's responsible for paying the licensing fees. And if anybody has any questions beyond what I've talked about here, or has a private issue they want to reach out to me, it's dspears@bmi.com. dspears, SPEARS @bmi.com. I know this can be an intimidating process. I know that you sometimes feel like you're mistreated. If BMI is one of those experiences that were negative, I'd love to hear about it, because that's not who we try and be. And we've got a team of folks in Nashville that every day are picking up the phones, trying to help customers through this very confusing process. And if at any point you feel like you've had a negative experience, let us know. I will say that I told you before that some of those other organizations may not have the same attitudes that we do about customer service. Some of those other organizations do have folks working on the licensing that are not employees of that organization. They're independent contractors. So all they really care about is getting a license and moving on. Whereas we understand this is a long-term relationship. You're going to be supporting songwriters and consuming music for the future. And we want to make sure that we have a smooth relationship where you feel like you're getting value and you're getting treated appropriately. And if you're not, or don't feel it, please let me know. It can be a contentious business, I know. And I think many of you have probably had at least one bad experience if you've been dealing with PROs. And I apologize for that. And if it's us, we're always trying to rectify it. So please let us know.
Hey, Dan, one more question came in from, well, maybe two.
Yeah. Is there a time limit that exists where a small clip of music can be used? There really isn't. There used to be this, it's an urban myth called needle drop, where if you dropped a needle drop for just a few seconds that it wasn't subject to copyright, but that's not really true. Any music that's played publicly requires licensing. Are aware of any brokers who negotiate the fees as a group as opposed to having to work with all four independently? That's a good question. I'm not aware that they would negotiate fees. Now, understand that if they were to negotiate any fees, it would just be with CSAC and GMR, because there are no negotiations between BMI and ASCAP. As I said, we're prohibited by law, both of us, from negotiating fees. We have to have one standard agreement for everybody in that industry that we serve. I don't know that there are any consultants that would negotiate fees, but if you're having problems and you want to reach out to me, I'm happy to be behind the scenes and consult you on that, just by virtue of the fact that, we feel strongly about our relationship with the PRLA, and if we can serve the members in any way, we will. And I'll do it in a way where I'm respectful of those organizations, but I also want you to feel like you're not being taken advantage of. And I've been around BMI long enough, 33 years, I guess, that I kind of understand the system. And I just hate it when businesses are being taken advantage of through fear. And some of those organizations use those kinds of tactics. They send you very legal letters that don't really help you understand what music you're using that's actually represented by that company, which is all you really want, right? You just want to know what it is that you're paying for. But all these companies do have catalogs on their websites. So if that gives you more comfort as you discuss licensing with CSAC or GMR, to get a greater appreciation for exactly who they're calling you about and what songwriters they represent, I would urge you to go on there and look around. I know you've got bigger and better things to do in your business, but if you want to feel like you've got more knowledge so that you're operating from a position of strength when they call, I think it would make sense.
Okay, well, thanks again, Dan. Really appreciate your time today. And there's the last question from Donnie. Will the presentation be available on the PRLA website? The answer is yes. We did record it, so it'll be available so you can review it again or share it with others. happy to do that. And Donnie also said great presentation, which of course I agree with. Thank you very much, Dan. But that was from a real user, not from me, your friend. So that's good.
Well, I appreciate that. And I hope somebody on this call will take advantage of this Gigmore thing, because we've just started it and we're trying to get some sort of real world examples of businesses that have booked artists / songwriters through this Gigmore booking service and come away with some feedback like, hey, this was great. It was a seamless process. And again, we're trying to incentivize you by providing that $200 discount that's only available by virtue of the fact that you're a member of the association. So we don't very often do these kinds of things where $200 off, but it's a new partnership, and we're in the midst of trying to be creative and helping you all get back on your feet again. I know how difficult these last couple of years have been, and if live music might be able to, to have something to do with bringing customers back into your venue, and staffing is a huge issue, which I know it is. Maybe this is an easy way to try something without having to expend much capital. So we're happy to help with it.
Okay.
All right. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you to the PRLA team. We love you guys. And again, happy to help anybody that needs consulting, what have you.
Thanks, Dan. It was
All
nice
right.
seeing you. I
Good to
appreciate
see
your
you.
time.
Of course, Hope. Thanks, John.
Bye, everybody.
See y'all.
Bye, everybody. Have a good week.